So I was all proud and happy because I was like, yeah, I made this Sonic Labyrinth video. Yeah, it's good. And then I was like, oh yeah, I forgot to add audio, and I forgot to add audio for the last video I made, so I had to redo them entirely. So if I sound less enthused, that's because I had to redo this entire video, and it's not a short video, so that's lovely. Anyway, Sonic Labyrinth is a game that a lot of people say is one of the worst Sonic games of all time. And they are completely wrong. In fact, I have no idea what they're even talking about, because Sonic Labyrinth is completely fine. In fact, I'd say it's a good game. And why is it a good game? Because Sonic Labyrinth is unique and fun. But let's go over the most important part of this game, the story. I'm talk about the story first, because the story explains the whole entire game, and it's really funny. It even comes with 4 illustrations, so I'm going to read it, what exactly it says in the manual, word for word, because it's hilarious. Part 1, Dr. Eggman's Plan. Ugh, that hateful hedgehog. He's always thwarting my plans, and I won't forgive him. Dr. Eggman, an evil genius who's planning to conquer the world today, is in a bad mood. I hate that guy's Speed. It's always the speed that gets me. Speed. Yeah, it's Speed. This time I'll win. He was still the same weird evil genius scientist who was angry and happy by himself. Part 2, Sonic the Hedgehog's Mistake. Sonic woke up in the afternoon that day. Tails had just gone out a few days ago, saying that he was going on a travel. Sometimes it's good to be alone. While thinking about that, Sonic got up and put his favorite boots on, but what the? His legs felt heavier than usual. He had a bad feeling about that. When Sonic looked closely at the boots, they had Eggman's mark on them. Sonic had fallen into Eggman's trap. Part 3, Dr. Eggman's Triumphant Face. Da-ha-ha, Sonic, I got the Chaos Emeralds! Dr. Eggman's triumphant voice echoed over South Island. The evil genius is back on Sonic's home island. Sonic, how are those Dr. Eggman Deluxe Speed Down boots? The boots are made with the Chaos Emerald's power. You'll need a Chaos Emerald to take them off. Dr. Eggman was in a good mood, but noticing he was blurting out a lot of intents. Part 4, Adventure in the Great Labyrinth. Sonic tried to run towards Dr. Eggman, but his boots prevented him from running and jumping. Cracks and roaring sounds are heard on South Island. The destruction of Eggman Land. The Great Labyrinth has begun. But Sonic never gives up. I can't run, I can't jump, but I can still make a spin attack. Don't think he won't win just because of this. Sonic heads towards the Great Labyrinth to recover the Chaos Emeralds. That's the story. Eggman sneaks over to give Sonic a slowdown power boots, and while he's sleeping, and instead of just killing him, he's like, I'm gonna make him wear these slow boots. He also gives away that if he uses the Chaos Emeralds, he can get rid of the boots. There's only like 4 Chaos Emeralds or something like that in this game, and you're kind of vague what even if they are, but anyway, the main goal is Sonic needs to go for this giant labyrinth and beat Eggman. Of course, going through this labyrinth, Sonic's going to have to fight all the new enemies, or badniks in this case. So let's go over them before we talk about the main game. We've got Aurora, which is a little guy that shoots arrows from a distance. They're pretty easy, so nothing to worry about. Burrow, which is a little guy that sticks his tongue out sometimes. They kind of suck, so they're nothing to worry about. Dragago. This guy pops out of the areas, and he can't hit him, and he'll shoot fire at you. These guys are kind of annoying, so make sure you get out of their way as fast as you can. Flawawa. These will shoot little projectiles, but they're stationary, so they're pretty easy to kill. Gabubu. This guy flies, and that's about it. Gea Coco. It's a weird skull that appears and shoots projectiles. Just walk away. That's the best advice. Kabutoto. You have to shoot at it in a cannon in order to defeat it, and yeah, that's about it. It kind of sucks. Kibaba. These guys will shoot missiles, and that's about it. Mukaka. These are little centipede guys that run around really fast around you, and they're kind of annoying. Naruo is a little snake guy that charges at Sonic occasionally. Not rarely. Very rarely, so they kind of suck. Otato is a little short guy that just flies, I guess. They can fly now. Pepe is just a guy that shoots annoying little gluey stuff around, and they kind of suck. They suck because they're annoying, so screw these guys. Boyo is a bubble, and it's a bubble, so it's very easy to defeat. Roboto looks pretty cool, but he just kind of walks back and forth, so pretty lame. Toriri, however you say that, is a penguin that kind of moves, shoots back and forth, and it's a little fast, but not too hard to defeat. Takako is a little fish guy that doesn't spike, that just shoots oil and fire, and they're kind of annoying, so just avoid them. Yeto Kaka is the last guy. He's a little hermit crab guy. Sometimes he'll go on a shelf, most of the time he won't, so he's pretty easy to defeat. And that's all the badniks. So, Sonic Labyrinth is a game that I don't think is bad at all. But why is it considered infamous? Well, we couldn't tell by the story, Sonic is slow in this game. However, as the story also said, in order to combat this, Sonic can turn to a spinball, spinball, ha. You can spin dash, and that's how he travels along in the game. If you don't, he will move very slowly. There's power-ups, and there's a bunch of other stuff here. The gameplay, I find, is pretty good, actually, for the most part. It basically kind of works like a Marble Madness pinball table, where essentially you gotta find 3 keys in order to get to the next goal. There's only 4 levels, and 4 acts in each level, the 4th act being just the ending. Overall, it's pretty basic. You got enemies, of course, and obstacles along the way. The momentum actually feels pretty good, and I found it pretty easy to go around. You can charge your spin dash too if you need to, but overall, I didn't feel the need to do that for the most part, since the regular one by itself does a lot. And as soon as you press the button again, Sonic will stop, so making sure you can actually go where you want to go. So it's nothing too hard. In fact, the game is pretty short and pretty simple. Once you figure out that you got to spin dash around and that you can stop by pressing the button again, you won't have a problem at all. So anybody saying this game is horrible is probably played it for 1 second, walked around, thought Sonic's slow, and just gave up. I know it's kind of weird to make Sonic slow, but it emphasizes the use of the spin dash, and moving around this area is kind of fun since you're being bounced around, but you can control yourself better, unlike Sonic Spinball, where my biggest problem with that game is you barely feel like you can do really anything. And even then, it didn't feel like a really good pinball game on top of that. The game being developed by an unknown publisher named Minto Gaiken probably also doesn't really help its case. I mean, all the other games are being promoted by other companies. This one didn't have any commercials and came out later in the Game Gear's lifespan. Not the latest Game Gear game release, because we got another one after this. But overall, it is a kind of an odd game to come out. I think it's pretty impressive. I think the game looks good. The isometric view works better. I think it might even be better than the Sonic 3D Blast for the isometric view. And I think the game works pretty well. Anyway, let's get on to the levels. And we're going for each act individually, since each act has something unique to give us. There is something to note, is that sometimes you'll find these arrows and they'll give you power-ups. I actually don't recommend picking these up because, as you can see, the screen kind of freaks out and it makes it really hard to see. The question mark ones, I don't know how they even do, and there's like a speed-up one. Overall, they're not very useful, and I think the invincibility just hurts your eyes more than anything, so just don't really need to use them. And there actually really is no ranks other than boss fights, so you basically, every time you get hit, you drop your keys, you can pick them up pretty easily. Alright, let's get into the levels of Sonic Labyrinth. The first zone is Labyrinth of the Sky. Labyrinth of the Sky is pretty basic and pretty easy. This basically teaches you most of the controls. Essentially, there's a lot of bumpers and a couple of enemies here. Most of them are pretty easier than the one guy who sucks ass. And yeah, we got conveyor belts, which move Sonic their way. They can be a little annoying. And they have pretty easy key placements, so overall, you're not going to have too much of a hard time. And there's also springs and other things that makes you have fun in the level. Springs will move you to different platforms or even up in the sky. There are also protruding spikes in these zones. They appear in every zone. For the most part, they aren't too difficult, but sometimes you might have to go under them to get a key. In the Labyrinth of the Sky, we have, of course, a couple enemies. The enemies that are in this zone are the Flawaba, Pepepe, and Tororo. And all of them are pretty easy to take care of, other than the Pepepe, because they shoot annoying glue, and they're kind of annoying. They're actually probably the most annoying enemy in the game, and of course they appear at the very beginning. Act 2 will have Sonic going for conveyor belts and bumpers. Well, conveyor belts, of course, but there was new verticality, and the level's a little bigger, but overall it's pretty much the same as the last time. The bumpers don't really do a whole lot. It makes you feel like more in a pinball area, but since they have a very small hitbox, they're barely going to affect you. There's also a new gameplay mechanic. Down here is an edge, and if you go down there, you can go to, that's where you can find a new area. You can kind of drop down. Pretty unique feature. Act 3 is also pretty basic, more verticality than the last level. In fact, it's kind of like a cuber level where you're going up the most of the time. And of course, the slopes have a unique momentum. Even though this is an 8-bit Sonic game and not even a traditional one, I feel like the momentum feels more similar to this actual classic Sonic games in this asymmetric game than it did in the other 2D Sonic games in the 8-bit. Which, I guess, says a lot about this game's quality. Once you get to Act 4, you'll find a little unique area where Sonic drops down and goes down the slide. This is what you do for the boss, and it's basically just collect a bunch of rings. They don't really add much to anything, so it's kind of pretty much pointless, but it is a little fun set piece, and you do feel a lot of speed here. Once you've done the slide, you'll go down a tube, which will send you to the boss fight. The boss fights usually start out with these mecha little guys, and then the big guy will finally appear after they appear, and they're pretty, you just gotta avoid them. You get 2 other rings, including one you already got, and you can't recollect rings, so keep in mind you don't have very limited health here. The most part, even though the boss might pull you off guard, they are pretty easy. You just gotta make sure you just not avoid getting hit by them. The best way is to keep your distance and spin dash and keep away from his arms. And once that's done, you'll collect his Chaos Emerald. Oh yeah. The next zone is Labyrinth of the Sea Zone. Despite its name, this level is not underwater, since there is no water physics in this game, luckily, so this zone is actually not too bad. Even though we have a nice little underwater setting in the background, we have no air bubble stuff problems, we have no weird physics, and we already have the physics of the game, but nothing is fucked up. The most notable thing about this one, it adds cannons, which shoot Sonic in certain areas, as well as these little things that are basically just to bump the springs from the previous zone. Act 1 here, we're just trying to figure out where the keys are using the cannons and avoiding the enemies. This zone has quite a lot of enemies, including Kabuto, Atoto, Boyoyo, Tagakiyo, and Yakihaki. Anyway, this is Act 1, even though it's a little bigger than the previous stage. It's pretty simple. Just use the cannons, and once you'll figure it out, you should be able to pass it. Act 2, we got out of water because it looks pretty generic. We've got these new little things, where these hub of goo here, that make Sonic go even slower than he is and can't spin dash, so just avoid them. Overall, they're not a big hassle. This act introduces the doorways, which can be very annoying, since these doors will lead you to a certain area, and sometimes they won't send you back the same way. You can go, so they're like basically like they'll take you to a certain area, sometimes they won't take a certain area. It's kind of confusing to explain, but basically they kind of suck ass, and they will get worse as the game goes on. Here, it's pretty basic. There's not a whole lot of levels in area here. Act 3 it gets a little tricky-dicky when you have some really annoying enemies that are kind of hard to walk around when you're trying to get to your key. And there's a lot of falling platform areas here, and you got to figure out how do you get the keys. There's one key here that's a little tricky-dicky, but once you explore the area, you'll figure out how to get that key. There's a key right here that's out of bounds. How do I get that? Well, I explored the level. And when I explored down, I found this little cannon here that shoots Sonic all the way up and into the key, and it takes me right to the goal, which is pretty neat. You once again go down a slide into the boss fight known as Connie Pearl in Act 4, and immediately you get hit, which kind of sucks, but at the same time, this boss fight is pretty easy. The enemy can only hit when it shoots out a pearl at you, so that's the only time you can hit it, when it opens up and it shoots a pearl. And we're probably wondering, well, how is it easy? Well, you see, if you go down here, the pearl guy will only shoot to the right. If you just stay to the left side, you can easily shoot it, spin dash into the guy, and he'll die. Too bad for him. Don't drop the glorious next Chaos Emerald. The next zone is called Labyrinth of the Factory. Labyrinth of the Factory has a little bit more gimmicks up there. There's lightning, there's a lot more spikes, and there's teleportation and these weird spring-looking platforms, like the typical Sonic spring. But Sonic walks onto Captain America's shield, and they transport him to different areas. These things can get kind of annoying because some of them only won't go back and forth and only go in one direction. And there's also these teleporters which take you to different areas, and they seem like they can be annoying, but they're actually better than the doors, since they will take you in one direction all the time. So the teleporter will take you back and forth to the same place rather than the doors, which don't do that all the time. This zone is mostly known for its obstacles rather than its enemies. This is why it only has two enemies, being the Kibaba and Mukakaka. Act 2, we get to use more of Captain America's shield, as that's mostly the main part of this level. It's basically transporting over bottomless pits, which do kill you if you fall off. There's a lot of moving platforms. It seems a little scary, but it's actually kind of a smaller area than you think, and you should be able to find the keys pretty easily. Act 3 is a little tricky-dicky because there's one key that is kind of an asshole key, and you have to look up a guy in order to figure it out. The rest of the game is not like this. So the first two keys are actually pretty easy. This level is actually not very big at all, so you kind of get confused, like where could the rest of the keys be? At first I thought, well, these teleporters are here, they must do something, and they teleport you right 1 centimeter away, and both of them do that. So where the hell is this key? Well, I had to look it up. This is not very intuitive. So at the bottom of the stage, you kind of just wait there for a little bit, and they only spawn this way, and then the platform will come to you. Yeah, you have to wait there. You have to notice, specifically wait in that spot, and then you can go to the other side of this one platform, which is kind of annoying. Talk about unintuitive. To make things even worse in this stage, there was always this platform moving to this part of the area, which you couldn't get to, because the platform only moved one side, so that's kind of annoying. The final boss of this area is known as Needleman. He's pretty easy. After he shoots little projectile guys at you, he will spawn in with a bunch of needles, and yeah, he'll shoot at you, but you can go behind him and easily just hit him. Keep in mind that he came back into you and that can damage you, but if you keep that in mind, it's not going to be very hard. And once he does do that, you get a Chaos Emerald. Oh yeah. The last zone is Labyrinth of the Castle. Aesthetically speaking, Labyrinth of the Castle is my favorite. It looks pretty cool, and it kind of reminds me of Spyro of all games. I'm not sure why. Overall, there's a bunch of obstacles here, and it kind of tests your abilities, mostly for the fact that the stages are a lot longer. So Act 1 is pretty basic. There's, of course, a bunch of enemies in this zone, including Hororo, Burrow, Drago, Gababo, Gakaki, Naroro, and Robotato. Quite a lot of enemies, but overall, Act 1 should be too much of a challenge for anybody, if you got this far, let's say at least. Act 2 returns the doors, and so once you find the switch, you should be good to go. In Act 2, you'll find a lot of falling stuff, like icicles, as well as doors and such. And there's a little bit more of a maze, but nothing too bad. It will get worse in next act, so don't worry about that. The main goal about this act is that you gotta unlock a certain area by finding a switch, so you can get the one of the last keys. This area here, you have to find a switch in order to unlock it. It looks like you can get through, but you can't. Act 3 looks like it'll be easy, but it's actually not. Well, it has a pretty cool look. There's a lot of doorways, these waterfall conveyor belts, and a lot of enemies. It's a very long stage, and while I found the keys pretty easily, everything else is kind of difficult. Due to the door mechanics in this zone in the game entirely, it's actually pretty hard to find where we're supposed to go. And I found myself going in circles until I looked up a guide, and basically I learned that there's actually a down path I wasn't even aware of that takes you to the goal. I probably should have known about that, but at the end of the day, I didn't. Well, that was a little annoying. Overall, it wasn't too bad. And as a matter of fact, if I ever replay this game, I'll probably, since I know that, it won't be too hard. There is two tricky-dicky areas in the game, basically, that it's not very intuitive, being this zone and the one where you have to go to the bottom level and wait for a platform to appear. Other than that, the rest of the game is pretty basic. Sonic slides down the slide one last time in Act 4 to get to the final boss. Eggman is dropping bombs on Sonic, and that's the name of the boss, Smiley Bomb. Yes, the boss's name is Smiley Bomb. And it's not too difficult. In fact, you have a limited amount of rings, like always in this game, for fighting bosses. You're not even fighting Eggman, just fighting a robot that just shoots bombs. Basically, to drop a bomb on Sonic, you gotta dodge it, and then spin dash yourself back into it. It's hard and easy at the same time. It's kind of hard to explain, but it looks easier than it is, and it's also kind of easy, but at the same time, it can be a little tricky if you let your guard down. Overall, just keep the powering up, and you should be able to defeat this boss pretty easily. After defeating the first phase, it goes on the second phase. Now we get just a weird smiling egghead, and he will shoot lasers at you. It's basically the same thing as the last time, but it's faster. And I don't think the ones that shoot off the walls or something like that does any damage to Sonic. I mean, you can get damaged, but at the same time, I don't think the ones that was spun off actually hurt you. I haven't experienced it. And it's basically the same as the main part. Anyway, after a couple tries or so, I was able to get wherever this thing is. It doesn't look like a Chaos Emerald. I mean, does it look like a Chaos Emerald to you? Anyway, that's the end of the game. We get a little cutscene of Eggman running away and dropping whatever that is. I guess a Chaos Diamond or whatever. And Sonic finally gets his shoes back, I guess, or whatever, because he's still wearing shoes, but he's running now. So there you go. That's the end of the game. That's about it. Sonic Labyrinth is a pretty short game, but I think a pretty fun one overall. I like this probably more than the average Sonic fan does, if I'm to be completely honest. It gets a bad rep, but honestly, I think it's for people who have barely played the game or really give it a chance. If you play it all the way through, I think you're going to find a little bit of enjoyment in it. You may not love it entirely, but it's short, it's sweet, and what more could you ask for a handheld game? I think it works pretty well for the handheld format. And I think what the uniqueness of it, the isometric view looks pretty good. The gameplay works very well, and I find it fun. And overall, it shouldn't take you very long to finish. It only took me about like 30 minutes to beat the whole game. So, yeah, I'd recommend giving Sonic Labyrinth a try if you haven't already. You might be pleasantly surprised. Sonic Labyrinth, of course, was released in Game Gear, Master System in Brazil. I won't mention a lot of that, but most of the Gamer games, I think all of them were released on the Master System in Brazil only. It's not really noteworthy, and they're kind of rare because of how that economic system works in between countries and stuff like that, so I'm not going to count it for now. Anyway, you can tell the game is a little pricey. $36 compared to usually like $10 or $5 for Gamer games so far. It's because it's a little later release. In 1995, Sega was pretty much transitioning away from all their previous consoles, but Sonic was still releasing games on the Game Gear. The Game Gear just didn't have a very long shelf life compared to the Game Boy, at least, and it just started to have more and more problems. So lots of people are buying games for the Game Gear, so that's why this game's a little more rare. And it's obviously not the best way to play it. I obviously would want Sonic Labyrinth from the Game Gear because I like collecting games. But if you want to actually play this game, don't recommend it because Game Gear is not that great of a system. As I said a million times before, Sonic Adventure DX is a great game, and it also features every gamer game that you can unlock. It's not the best way to play because you gotta unlock all of them, but if you like me, like Sonic Adventure DX a lot, you already have all the games unlocked 3 times already, actually. Sonic Labyrinth was featured on the Mega Collection Plus, so only on Xbox PS2 users could play this. And I mentioned Mega Collection before. It's a really great game. I want to cover it when I get to it. Love it. And I recommend getting it if you have a 6th-gen console. The game was released on 3DS Virtual Console and pretty much every Virtual Console that isn't Switch. Unfortunately, the store is shut down, so we don't have a lot to say about here, but hey, you find 3DS, you might find Sonic Labyrinth on it. Maybe, probably, who knows. Lastly, Sonic Origins Plus. I've mentioned this game multiple times. It's a really great game in my opinion. I've have some problems with it. We'll get to that when we get to it. And it has every gamer game on it, so that's pretty neat. You might be surprised to see Sonic Labyrinth that high in B tier, and I just think that's how good the game is. Sonic 1 might have been an A tier game if it wasn't for Labyrinth Zone, by the way. Ironically, Labyrinth Zone, the worst Sonic game level, is not a bad game. I just, I always hear bad stuff about the game, but very little talking about it. Sonic moves slow. Yeah, that's kind of the point. You're supposed to use his spin dash. It's even on the cover and in the manual. I just think that it's a neat little fun game. It doesn't overstay its welcome. It doesn't. It has annoying parts, but on replaythroughs, I don't think it would be that bad if you know about them. Just those two little sections can be a little tricky, but if you look it up, you can figure it out. You have the internet nowadays; it's not too hard. Overall, bad rap. I think it's a good game. I'm not regretting the fact that I put it over Sonic CD. I think it's actually a more well thought out game than Sonic CD, unfortunately. But yeah, if I had a choice between which one I go back to, Labyrinth. Well, maybe except for the Sonic Origins versus Sonic CD. That one is plays a lot better in my opinion than the regular version. And that's all I gotta say about this. We'll see you next time on the next, probably next Game Gear game because there's a couple left in the 1995. So see you then.